speaking to people about those unspoken needs we have, not in just, couples, but in family relationships, friendships, at work, all over the place. We have these expectations and nobody knows it but us. And we're creating these stories and narratives and all of this stuff in our head. And it's like, if you just said that, it's possible that the person could meet that need if you spoke up about it.
Hi, this is Danae. I'm the founder of Simple Families. Simple Families is an online community for parents who are seeking a simpler, more intentional life. In this show, we focus on minimalism with kids, positive parenting, family wellness, and decreasing the mental load. My perspectives are based in my firsthand experience raising kids, but also rooted in my PhD in child development. So you're going to hear conversations that are based in research, but more importantly, real life. Thanks for joining us. Hi there, thanks for tuning in. That voice you heard in the intro is Nedra Tawwab. Nedra is here today to teach us all about boundaries. Her book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself, helped me to see boundaries in a whole new light. And also to realize how boundaries impact us every day, each and every one of us. Nedra Glover Tawwab is a New York Times bestselling author, a licensed therapist, and a sought-after relationship expert. She helps people create healthy relationships by teaching them how to implement boundaries. Her philosophy is that a lack of boundaries and assertiveness underlie most relationship issues. And the gift that she brings is helping people to create healthy relationships with themselves and others. I really enjoyed Nedra's book. The biggest takeaway that I got, there were many, was that when it comes to boundaries, clarity saves relationships. Today, she's going to help connect the dots between burnout and boundaries, and also help us to consider how it's important that we as parents set boundaries for ourselves when it comes to our own kids. I hope you enjoy my chat with Nedra today. If you want the links to get in touch with her or the things that we talk about in this episode, go to simplefamilies.com/episode 323. Without further ado, here's our chat. Hi, Nedra. How are you?
I am well. Happy to be here.
I am glad to chat with you. So I just finished your book and it was amazing. I think there was something about it that you tied in so many things that I never really thought about as boundaries. And you connected them. You connected the dots on a lot of things.
Well, I am happy to be the dot connector. It comes from years of working with people and seeing these issues show up in a particular way. And you're like, oh, wait, we've been treating it as this when actually it is an assertiveness issue. It is an issue of stating your needs, not engaging in this idea that people can figure it out on their own or they should know. It's like, wow, this is all really boundary setting.
Yeah. So did you just kind of stumble into this work over years of being a therapist?
Stumble is a strong word. I think it was many intentional steps to get there. It was being creative in the process of being a therapist. Sometimes our tools they aren't always helpful, right? Like we have these theories, these books, and it's like, okay, this isn't working for my client. So we go back to the drawing board and we think of things that might be beneficial. And this is just something that I found that we needed, particularly with people who have resentment, work life balance issues, anxiety sometimes, certainly couples. Oh my gosh. The amount of couples I've seen that have these unspoken needs, is huge. When they have children in the relationship and they assume that their partner will hop into this role of a parent that they have created in their head, and this person is like sitting down watching TV while you're cleaning all the bottles and you're like, wait a minute, why aren't they? And it's like, well, have you asked them? Why should I have to ask them? And it's like, well, they see you cleaning the bottles and they think, hey, there's a person who likes to clean bottles. What am I hopping up for? So,
Right.
just speaking to people about those unspoken needs we have, not in just, couples, but in family relationships, friendships, at work, all over the place. We have these expectations and nobody knows it but us. And we're creating these stories and narratives and all of this stuff in our head. And it's like, if you just said that, it's possible that the person could meet that need if you spoke up about it.
Yeah. And as I was reading your book, something that I was thinking about was the evolving nature of boundaries, especially over the lifespan with major life changes.
Mm. Yeah, I think the biggest evolution of boundaries is within families, that growth from being a child to an adult. We sort of figure out who we want to be, who we don't want to be, what we like, what we don't like. It is a big betrayal when you find someone who makes macaroni better than your mother, right? It's like, "Ah." There's this constant discovering of self, this constant discovering of what you like and what you don't like, and taking that back to your family. I remember when I discovered that when I'm eating spaghetti, I like my meat sauce and my noodles separate. It was a big thing because my family made it combined, right? It's like, what do you mean? I'm like, can you make me a little pot on the side? I must have been at somebody's house or something and tasted it that way. And I was like, this is what I need in my life. Like this separation. And then communicating this to my mother, like, please make it separately, and the amount of reminders I had to give, like, hey, 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 don't mix it up. Set mine to the side. Like for me, that's like the beginnings of boundary setting, and it got to a point where it's like, hey, let me make it myself. This exact way that I want it.
Yeah. And I think that in childhood that I'll do it myself is kind of a something that is adaptive as we learn to grow and meet our own needs. But in
Mhm.
adulthood, that if you can't do it my way, I'll just do it myself. That's not always so adaptive, is it?
No, and I don't think it's always adaptive in childhood. One of the things of childhood is having, in some situations you have to be a listener. If a parent says, "Hey, no, I won't do it that way," then it's like, "Okay, I'll adapt to eating it like this." And, parents are shocked when you turn 18 and it's like, "Hey, this is the way I really wanted to do it, and I'm not going to do it all the time this way." But yes, we cannot always do things ourselves. That was just one example of us being
Mhm.
able to. But there are many times where we need to ask for support. We need to train other people to do the job. We need to make it clear how they can be supportive of us. Healthy boundaries are flexible boundaries. And it's, on one end of the spectrum, we could be really rigid and always doing things ourselves, never inviting support. And on the other end, we can always be needing people to do things. And in the beautiful middle, hopefully there is some give and take of both of those things.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between boundaries and limits and rules and how you envision those things?
I think with boundaries, it is a sort of rule. It's a personal rule. It's not a law, but it is, like in this space, this is the expectation. I think of, in the pandemic, it wasn't a law to wear a mask in a grocery store, but certain people had that boundary placed on their door as their expectation for being in the space. So it's not, law, it's not rule, but it's personal often. And in some places it is, a rule in that environment. So I don't make a huge distinction between like rules and boundaries, because I think sometimes boundaries can be rules and they can be, expectations. And it is a way for us to show up in our relationships in society and communities that we may need, certain boundaries as rules.
Yeah. I think from a personal standpoint, when I think about a boundary, I have this kind of visual of me with like this like circle around my body, kind of this me
Mm.
protecting myself versus a
Mhm.
rule. Sometimes, like if I'm giving my kid a rule, it's on them. Like this is your rule. And a boundary kind of feels like my personal boundary. Do you see it at all like that? Or is that just kind of my envisioning it?
I do think that boundaries are personal. right? Sometimes even when I look at rules, I think who broke a boundary to the point that we now need a rule? You
Mm.
know,
Mhm.
when we look at like traffic light, it was like, and, I think sometimes like, wow, we must have been driving really wild to have to be given traffic light. It had to become a rule for us to, respect this person is going, that person is going. It probably started as a boundary, like, hey, let me pass.
Yeah.
And then it developed into a rule. I wonder how often that happens, that we have these boundaries to protect ourselves, but they need to become rules to be adhered to. And yes, with kids, some things are rules, and some things are boundaries. I think of, sort of a rule slash boundary is like a bedtime with kids, or, certain ways of saying things. I think you can say almost anything, but there's a certain way to say it sometimes, right? Like you shouldn't point at people. That's not kind, and they may think you're saying bad things about them. Can you speak your opinion? Perhaps. And how do I teach you to do that? So that is a way that we shape some of the rules we have with our children.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about my family spent a month in Mexico this summer in a city, and there were a lot of intersections, and there were no stop signs, very few stoplights. And the cars just kind of came to the intersection and sort of paused sometimes and sometimes kept going. But there was kind of this mutual respect for space where they looked at each other and guided their decisions based on what other people were doing. But there wasn't really a rule about it. There was just kind of a loose boundary, but it seems to work. And I wonder
Mhm.
in some situations in life if those loose boundaries do seem to work, and some we really need to have something that is more concrete.
Yeah, I think that if it's working, do we have to talk about it? Sometimes we feel like when we get into relationships, we have to state all our boundaries. Like, these are all my boundaries. And it's like, well, everyone doesn't need the same boundaries with you. There are tons of people who naturally
Hmm.
respect boundaries, they naturally understand boundaries. And so, some things don't need to be communicated and some things do. So, how do we figure out what can be something that we need to say and what is something that can be a little looser?
Yeah. And we usually don't think too much about boundaries until they're not being followed, until they're being violated.
Absolutely. Yes. And certainly, if something has been violated multiple times, it becomes more important to us. So, we do think about it a bit more. It's like, wait a minute, this is a huge thing to me. So, maybe I do need to start communicating this.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about spoken versus unspoken boundaries?
Yeah, I think sometimes we think that boundaries are general knowledge, that people should know things, that they're trying to harm us by doing certain things. And sometimes people just don't know. You'd be surprised how many things people don't know. I remember meeting my first friend who didn't gossip. I was in high school. And, gossip, it was, as a kid, as a teenager, it was just a way to connect with people. And, I would start into this gossip and they would just stand there. It's like they
Yeah.
didn't give me any energy back. And I was like, oh wow, this person doesn't, like, they wouldn't say anything bad about
Wouldn't
people.
engage.
They would not engage. Like,
Oh.
that was their boundary. And I was like, and I'm saying there because it was twins.
Mm.
But they had this boundary of like, yeah, I don't need to talk about this random girl in our class. Now, if it has something to do with me, like this person did something to me, I could speak to that. But just like, oh my gosh, look at her hair, look at her outfit. It's like, I'm not doing that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what integrity to be able to really hold that with anyone.
Yeah, I think something that stood out to me in that is that how strong boundaries like that can be inspirational, and they can
Mhm.
they can empower other people to do the same.
Absolutely. I did feel empowered after that, and it made me feel a little stupid talking about people, right?
Yeah, a little wake-up call.
They're just looking at you like, "Okay, her hair. Yeah, this
Right.
is mean in a way that I never considered."
And then you're forced to find a new way to engage and connect with these people, and that requires some creativity.
Absolutely. I had to get really creative and learn to talk about myself, right? Because they weren't, they didn't want to hear about other people. It was really about us.
Yeah. And sometimes it's really clear like that. And I also kind of think there's two sides to this. Like that was a very clear boundary that they had, but you were also able to read the room and figure out that they're not going to engage. They don't this is not their thing. Do you feel like it's kind of two sides on that where some people are able to really set those boundaries and it to be obvious and sometimes it's hard for other people to really read the room and read and understand?
Yeah, and I think those are the cases where we have to be direct and we have to tell them. We
Mm-hmm.
may have to say to people, "Hey, I seen you've," and I've certainly done this before. "Hey, I seen you've caught me 10 times in a row. Please don't do that unless it's an emergency." But to call me that amount of times just to say, "Hey, how you're doing?" It's really disruptive when I'm actually busy and can't talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever worry that being too boundaried will make you seem cold or distant?
Too boundary. I don't know if there's a such thing as too boundary because the
Okay.
boundaries are flexible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you won't have a boundary about everything and you will have a boundary about some things. Um, and I think it's, reading the room, respecting another person's space is really important. And sometimes with our boundaries, it is our job to protect those boundaries and not always our job to put them on other people,
Mm.
right? So if I have a boundary around some things, it's not like, you know what, this other person has to do it too. It's like, no, it's my boundary. I can feel a way about this. And I think a part of relationships is allowing ourselves to sometimes be uncomfortable. Everything will not be 100% our way. It's not like, oh, I get to be like happy all the time. The temperature, the music selection, the food, the everything will be to my liking. Some of it won't. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's an unhealthy relationship. It just means that as a sacrifice to be with this person, you are, you're doing something a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of flexibility required in intimate relationships.
Mhm.
I made lots and lots of notes in your book. But one was you said fear around boundaries isn't rooted in fact. It's rooted in negative thoughts and storylines in our heads. I
Mhm.
love that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when we are not placing boundaries with people, it is typically based on some ruminating thoughts, right? So we're thinking about like this person will respond this way, they will say this. In my therapy sessions, I will have clients like talk about how this person will respond and they will give these elaborate stories of, they will say this. It's almost like it's happened, right? And then at the end of it, I'll say, we don't know what they would say. All of
Mm,
this is hypothetical. Isn't it so interesting how we just talk 30 minutes around a hypothetical conversation and reaction? Like,
mhm,
we have spent a great amount of time adding detail to a story that doesn't exist.
mm. Yeah, and sometimes that feels safer.
Absolutely. Than just actually saying it. Sitting in that fear and not doing it is safer than actually placing that boundary. I don't know how they will respond. And I'll tell you, 99% of the time when I've said something hard and uncomfortable, I have a whole idea in my head of how it'll go. It never goes that way
Mm,
ever. Whether their reaction is overboard, whether it is a underreaction, whether it is, appropriate for the message, it's never what I'm thinking. It's like, why can't I nail this? I just want to be able to, without a doubt, nail these ruminating thoughts. And it doesn't work. It's
yeah.
rooted in rumination.
Yeah, we do. We ruminate over these boundary violations. Like, how could she? Why would he? We think about it a lot without speaking to the person. And This happens in almost all intimate relationships. I feel like I was thinking, well, maybe it's more so in partnerships, but the parent-child relationship, it pops up kind of everywhere.
Yeah, I happen to believe that we don't know when we're offending people. That's why we're always offending people.
Mm.
We think we're just saying something. We think we're just making a joke. We think we're just, stating this need. And it's like, oh my gosh, that was so offensive. How would I know?
Yeah. And and sometimes families, the most intimate connections are the hardest to set boundaries with, especially if we feel like we've tried and failed to set boundaries before, repeating the process. Do you feel like if we've tried to set a boundary with someone and failed, that maybe we need to try again in a different way?
Yes, we have to restate our boundaries. There is this idea in relationships that saying something one time is enough, but some new research has come out that said we need to say things over and over and over for people to actually grasp what we're saying. I know that's really hard to believe. It can be, exhausting sometimes to think about saying something to a person. But if it's a relationship that you care about and one where the boundary isn't very, I think there are levels to boundary violations, right? There are some things where it's like, you need to say this once. And there are other things that we can actually repeat. Like it's annoying, but it's not anything that's a safety violation. I think those safety violations, I don't think you need to repeat several times, hey, you're making me feel uncomfortable sexually, please stop rubbing my leg. You don't need to repeat that several times, but you may need to say, to a friend, hey, I'm busy at work, I'll call you back. You may need to say that 10 times.
Mhm.
So I think there's levels to, what you repeat, but many boundaries do need to be repeated. And I know that we feel like, oh my gosh, I mustered up the courage to say it once. That should be enough. It is not enough because people, they hear it and then they forget it. They hear it, they forget it. They hear it and it's like, okay, let me do something about it. Then they forget to do something about it. That, there's this whole process of change for them. We don't change immediately. Change is a process. And so to change, we have to have some sort of repetition to that. And we are helping them when we repeat what we need.
Yes. I actually was thinking this morning, my husband has a boundary around me using his chapstick. And it seems like a small thing, but I have a really hard time putting it back where I found it. And he's the kind of person who has a spot for everything. And I was listening after I finished your book, I was searching around for my own chapstick, which of course I can't find because I have no idea where I put it. So I knew where his was. So I went and I found it. And I was kind of mindfully thinking about boundaries as I put his chapstick back, that he has set this boundary for me dozens of times. Danae, if you're going to use my chapstick, put it back where you found it. And I have such a hard time with it. And it's to the point where he gets frustrated with me because he's
Mhm.
repeated the boundary over and over again. Um, but it's taken a lot. And now I kind of feel like I'm seeing this through a new lens, right? That this is a boundary he set for me and he expects me to follow it. And I need to be mindful. I need to get off autopilot and
Mm.
pause to respect his boundary because for someone like me, that kind of thing's not easy.
Yeah, in my house, the chapstick is a fingernail clipper,
Oh,
right?
we have that too.
Yeah,
Right.
strange thing, I don't even use the fingernail clipper for me, I mostly use it for my kids, but my husband is like, "Where is the fingernail clipper? Please put it back," and I'm like so, part of it for me, the boundary I set is to buy multiples.
Yeah.
I'm like, "We I wanna buy 8."
Right.
Because
I would just lose all 8.
we need one in each room. because I don't know what I'm thinking I'm putting them back, and then he goes to use it, and he's like, "Where's the fingernail clipper?" I'm like, "Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I've done it again."
right.
So yeah, there is this constant repeating, but you're right. Now it's to the point where I'm like, "Go put it back."
Right.
I'm like, "Go put it back. Go
That
put it back."
self-talk, right?
Yeah, it's like, "Go now, go now. You just use it. Go." I really
Yeah,
have to remember that because naturally, guess what I don't wanna do? Put it
yeah,
back. I
right.
wanna put it in this random spot. That is my natural orientation to just leave it wherever I clip the nail.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
it
I feel like
requires some effort to change that line of
it
thinking.
does, and I think we have to recognize that with kids too. I mean, I have a boundary with the kinetic sand where it has to stay at the table or on the play mat, and, yesterday it was on the play mat, but, it became kind of like a beach of kinetic sand, and my child started rolling in the kinetic sand, and it was everywhere, and it exceeded the boundary of the play mat. And that kind of thing, she got caught up in the moment, she got carried away, her imagination went wild, and it is, I mean, she definitely didn't do what I asked her to do, and it was everywhere, but in some ways, I do think this sort of giving her this boundary and repeating the boundary and helping her to understand that I see that sometimes you're gonna forget, sometimes you're gonna get carried away.
Mhm,
Let's keep practicing, or let me
mhm,
give you less because I've given you more than you can handle. So it's my responsibility to help give you some parameters.
mhm. And sometimes the boundary is not allowing anyone to dishonor the boundary,
Mm.
right? So, "Hey, I said play mat, but now we're gonna keep it at the table
Mhm.
because even the play mat is too broad."
Right.
So, sometimes we'll put it on this other person, like, "You need to do these things," and sometimes people can't. I think
Mhm.
about that with substance abuse, that there's, a key component is not being able to control it. And so sometimes we will think we're setting these boundaries. You can't drink anymore. Don't do drugs. And it's like, that's not a boundary that a person with a use issue can manage. Now, what do you do when they do too much? What do
Yeah.
you do when they've had two drinks? Do you say, okay, I'm going to take your beverage because this is my party and I made this request to you and I will now see to it that my boundary is honored. Perhaps it's not inviting the person if they can't honor it. Perhaps it is, like how do we set reasonable boundaries based on the person? Because sometimes our boundaries it's just like, a person should be able to and it's like that is not a reasonable expectation for this situation.
Mhm.
I think of it I just watched, Benjamin Button,
Oh, I love that.
and
I
I
haven't seen
know
that in years. I need to watch that
I have
again.
not seen it since it came out, and I did not realize it was sad. I didn't even remember it being sad.
Oh, I do.
But anyways, it was this part where he's in church and the pastor is like, "Walk," and he fell. He's like, "I can't walk." Like that's an unreasonable expectation. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm not pretending to be in this wheelchair. If we really think about the capacity of people and the expectations we're placing, we will have more reasonable expectations. But sometimes we're thinking about, well, I can walk. It's like, okay, this
Mhm.
person cannot.
Yeah.
Do we really have that expectation for them?
Oh, 100%, because, the minute the kinetic sand is on the table, it's the engagement is with the hands. Once it's on the floor, it's under the feet, it's under the everywhere. It's everywhere. The
Mhm,
rolling in it. I think that it's just too much when we give them more than we can they can handle. When we put them in a situation where it's more than they can manage,
mhm.
then it becomes on us to change the boundaries to something more reasonable that is going to be manageable for everybody so we can set them up for success.
Yeah, I think about a big parenting fail that we often do is we set kids up for food and mess failures and be like, "Be careful." It's like, I don't even trust my kids to be careful in my house. I'm sorry, I don't.
Yep.
It's like, you just can't eat over there. That's the whole thing. You can't eat
Yeah.
carefully in that room, period. Like, it's not even an option. You can go in the kitchen and you could get crumbs all over the place. Have at it because it's going to happen. There's no way to carefully eat a graham
Mhm.
cracker without dropping crumbs. I
Right.
know that. So now I'm asking this kid to bite the graham cracker, hold their hand under their mouth to catch it. That's not a reasonable expectation. What's more
Mhm.
reasonable is to say, this is the space, this is the boundary, this is the
Yeah.
space in which you can have at eating graham crackers, popsicles, um, play with slime. Like this is your zone.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's part of our role is steering the ship. Thinking about my son wanted to go out on his scooter when it was very, very wet and on the concrete, and it was slippery. And he's like, "No, I'll be careful. I'll be careful. I promise I'll be careful." Like, even if you're so careful, which he is, accidents happen, things happen.
Yeah, and I wonder, because my kids will do the same thing. I'll be careful. And it's
Yeah.
like, what does it do to us to know that we weren't careful enough? How does that impact our mental health?
Mhm.
Isn't that like putting some blame on us that we can't control?
Mm.
How do we beat ourselves up when we actually go out on that wet pavement, ride our scooter, and fall, and we were trying to be careful? Oh,
Yeah.
ouch. The mental health crisis that brews within us when we have tried our best to not make a mistake and we still
Mm.
make the mistake. Perhaps the protection there is a mental health one,
Oh my
right?
goodness. Yeah. I'm thinking about I moved into a new house and I was trying to back my car out of the garage, and I'm notorious for not doing a good job of backing out of the garage. And I was looking at the side of the garage and I'm thinking, be careful, Danae, be careful, be careful, be careful. And I definitely hit the side of the garage. As I was intentionally watching, trying to be so careful, I still did the thing I didn't mean to do.
Yeah. I have a personal policy of not trying to make people feel worse when they've made a mistake.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't you just look? It's like, I am 100% sure this person was looking.
Right.
I am
Yeah.
100% that you didn't say, how can I scratch my car up today?
Right.
There's this assumption that you're not being careful. It's like, no, I'm being super careful about this thing. I'm not trying to run a light. To me, it's an accident. And so to say to people sometimes, like, why didn't you? It's like, I really felt confident in my ability, and you making me feel worse just makes me feel worse.
Right, right. Yeah, because accidents happen whether or not we're doing our best. I think that it can still happen, and that definitely is the case for me. I find that through my mistakes, I give my kids a lot of grace when I see my own mistakes in that light. We're going to pause for a 2-minute word from today's sponsors. The first sponsor today is Less Brands. My goal is to always keep things simple, so I'm constantly looking for a solution to do as little work as possible when it comes to my hair, yet still get great results. I recently shared some progress pictures on Instagram of my hair since I started using Less Brands, and I have to say that many of you all were just as surprised/impressed as I am. It's a 3-part system: a shampoo, conditioner, and an all-in-one styler. And the all-in-one styler does not leave your hair crunchy or wet looking, one of my peeves. I've been loving Less Brands, and I'm not the only one. They have over 30,000 5-star reviews. From September 23rd to September 30th, Less is celebrating their 5th birthday with a huge sale by giving you 15% off site-wide. Go to lessbrands.com, that's L-U-S brands with an S.com to get 15% off. Again, that's lessbrands.com to get 15% off. Our second sponsor for today is Indeed. If you're hiring, the right candidate might be doing everything they can to find you. And if you use Indeed, you can be sure you're doing everything you can to find them too. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place, which is why my favorite thing about Indeed is it's simple. Data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. That means as soon as you sponsor a job, you get a short list of candidates right away. Indeed does the hard work for you. And they also know that when you're doing everything for your company, you can't afford to overspend on hiring. So visit Indeed.com/families to start hiring right now. Go to Indeed.com/families. Indeed.com/families. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing is not available for everyone. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. When I'm thinking about families and boundaries, extended family is something that comes up a lot. Something I hear a lot from parents about letting getting the generation that came before us to let go and to let us take on responsibility for making decisions about parenting. Is this an area that you hear a lot, managing in-laws and grandparents?
Absolutely. I think we're in a generation where extended family has less of a hold on us. For decades, there used to be this multi generational household, there used to be this closeness of family, and now you have families moving away. You have them wanting to be more autonomous, wanting them to do, they want to do things differently. And so, yeah, there's a lot of friction when people have a certain way of doing things, particularly when you've turned out okay. I've heard. I know a woman who says, "I smoked when I was pregnant," and she proudly says it because her child was born healthy. Right? This was in the '80s, so she's like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's like, well, sometimes there is. Your child is okay, right? Great, but I don't know if that's like if we should be advocating for that. What are you saying about me? A lot of times when we're doing something different, it is like, what are you saying about me? What are you
Right.
saying about how I raised you? What are you saying about how I raised your husband?
Yeah. Because when we go against that group dynamic, they perceive it as a rejection. It's like if you're doing it differently, then you're saying without saying that I did it wrong.
Yeah, I think it's the same way with anything though, right? If we go out to dinner with friends and we say, "Hey, I'll take a mocktail instead of, a cocktail."
Mm,
Right? It's like, "Why aren't you drinking?"
yeah.
It's this like indictment of the other person when really it's like, I really like the taste of Sprite and grenadine. Like
Mhm,
that's the whole reason. Or because I want to. It's none
mhm.
of your business. But so often when we are doing something different from other people, it is a challenge to them, and that is their work to do. We can't rescue them from that. It happens with extended families. It happens, in all sorts of relationships that people are like, wait, what's wrong with what I did or what I'm doing?
So when you are doing something different and you get pushback from those family members, how do you set the boundary? Because it's going to be uncomfortable if you're confrontational.
Yeah, I think it's, a lot of what we talked about earlier, that you'll have to repeat that boundary
Mm,
because they are learning a new skill. You're teaching them a new way of changing diapers, a new way of speaking to children, a new way of parenting, a new way of, going on family vacations. And so it will have to be repeated. The only time that I've been challenged by that is when I've repeated it and someone has definitely told me they didn't care.
mm,
Right? Like, there are times where people will say, "Hey, I hear you and I don't care."
mm.
And it can be verbally, it could be through their behaviors. Now, that might be a little challenging, like, "Oh, wow." But there are other times where, people they just forgot, it
Yeah.
hasn't been a thing. I think about, all the allergies that kids had now. I can't remember one kid in my elementary school with an allergy, not one. I don't know if we didn't pay attention to them, if somebody was going into shock and I don't know what was happening. But now kids, they have peanut butter allergies. They have, all of these sort of things. So telling a parent, who reared kids in a generation where, this wasn't as common, or at least it wasn't as tended to, um, you're breaking a cycle there.
Mhm.
Like, hey, don't give my kid this. You will have to make sure that they aren't doing that thing, because in their brain, it's like, oh, well, if you just give it to them more often, they'll get over it. It's like, No, it's not like we can extinguish this. It is a thing that is really a thing. Please do not do it. So there is some repeating that needs to occur.
Mm, yeah, and I've heard of that coming up with families where, a child has allergies and the grandparents are like, "Oh, it's fine, you just need to feed it to them," and the grandparents do feed it to them, and it's a whole thing
Hmm.
that sort of taking a different approach, and in that situation, if you were to firmly say, "Do not feed my child peanuts, they have an allergy to peanuts," and it's disregarded, and then you say it again, where do you go from there if the person just seems to be like, "Oh, they were fine. They just got a little rash on their face. It's not a big deal."
Well, I think with children, safety is really important. So if
Mm,
we have someone that's not respecting an allergy that could lead to, some pretty serious issues, I think there is a case for protecting your kid at all costs. Do you allow this person to feed them food?
mhm,
Can you say, please don't feed my kid anything, or maybe not even, have them alone with this person who would give them stuff that they could have a reaction to, because now it's a safety issue. It goes beyond, general boundary into boundary 2.0. Like, whoa, someone can be harmed here. We can't allow this to fly. This isn't something that I can ignore.
mhm. And sometimes it's safety, sometimes it's a more personal preference too.
Mhm.
I think about parents who don't like their kids to have a lot of sugar, and then
Mhm.
grandparents who like smuggle sugar into the kids. May or may not have happened in my house before. But I think that kind of situation comes up too, right? Where the grandparents or other extended family members think that you're not indulging your kids enough and they want to be
Mhm.
fun. They want to give them special privileges.
Mhm.
And when we try to set a boundary around that, then we're viewed kind of as this cold, um, kind of like fun police.
Yeah, I think this really beautiful thing happens is every parent gets to raise their child in the way that they want to. And I think grandparents just knowing that, like, hey, when I was a kid, you did X, Y, and Z. This is my opportunity to do my X, Y, and Z.
Mm,
Please let me do that. And this is one of the things that I deem as important. You don't get a do-over. So
yeah,
this is my time to parent my child, and this is how I want to do it.
yeah.
Should we be looking for people to agree with our boundaries, is what I'm hearing.
Mm,
Should people, lovingly respect them? Oh, yes, this is a wonderful boundary. Less
yeah.
sugar. Love it. They don't have to like the boundary.
Mhm.
I wouldn't either. You know, I think that, when we want to do things with people, we want to do those things. And there are some boundaries that people have with me, and I don't like them. But because I love the person, I want to be in this relationship, I respect it.
Yeah. Yeah, in your book, you talk about, what happens after you've set a boundary and you feel awkward about it. Like if you had to have that firm, please do not give my kids sugar if that's your belief. And that's the boundary that you want to hold. And then what do you do next? And you say, just act normal.
There's this idea that we have to present as mad, frustrated that this person made us say this thing to them, and just act normal. Whatever the next interaction would naturally be, hey, do you want to sit down and watch some Golden Girls? Then do that. You don't have to avoid the person or change your behavior in any way. Let's make uncomfortable conversations a normal part of relationships. And the way that we do that is normalizing saying tough things and getting back to the business of loving the person.
Yeah. And maybe my favorite quote from your book was that clarity saves relationships.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's not something we think about often, is that really by setting these boundaries, we're more likely to keep a relationship, a healthy relationship, rather than lose one.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
do you think that's true? Or do sometimes boundaries result in us losing people?
I read this book, and it was about divorce, kind of a how to save your marriage type book. And one of the top reasons for divorce was people not telling their partner what they wanted. And that sometimes leading to infidelity. So they like, these things, or they feel like no one sees me, but they're also not showing themselves. How do people honor us in relationships without us being clear about who we are? It's not possible. How can people call you on your birthday or send you birthday cards or whatever thing that you really enjoy without you saying, "Hey, it's really important to me to have people call me," or, whatever those things are that we're wanting. Lots of times we're waiting for this person to figure out our body language, our distance, our coldness, and all these other things, when really what we need to say is, I need this, I want this, can you do, this is a part of me and it's really important, and not what we typically do is, it's just not healthy for us. So clarity is really what helps us stay in healthy relationships.
Yeah. I think about how sometimes someone has to drop the ball before we even notice what the boundary is, like with the birthday thing. Like, I really like getting birthday cards from the store, just like my husband going and spending time picking out one that he thinks I would love. And
Hmm.
I didn't know that I liked that and that was important to me until a couple of years went by when he didn't do it. And then I had to be really clear in that expectation that I really enjoy birthday cards. Can you please take the time to go to the store each year and pick out a birthday card that's personal to me? And I had to be very explicit in that. That was not there was no mind reading that was gonna fix that.
Yeah, you have to let people know very directly, like, clearly, this is the issue I'm having, and here's a solution to fix this issue. Because without that, you would be this person who's not getting cards. You're really upset at them. It's all their fault. How could they ever think that a person wouldn't like to receive cards? All of this stuff. Now, cards aren't very important to me. So, guess what? I'm not often doing giving people cards.
Yeah.
I don't like the accumulation of paper.
Yeah, and you would never know that I wanted one, right? Because they're not important to
Yeah,
you. So you would
they're
need me
not
to tell you
important to
that.
me. So I would need you to say, "Hey,
Yeah,
let me send me a card every here and there." For me, it's like, why they put this card in here? Now I have something
yeah,
else to throw away. You know,
right.
so it's like now a handwritten note, I do appreciate that. A text, an email, it's like, okay, great. Now we're saving trees.
Mhm.
But, an actual card, sometimes that's not my thing. But for those in my life who I know it's important to, I send them cards.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. So there was another quote lots of quotes that I loved, but this one really stood out too. It was, "You don't have to be boundaryless to be loved."
Yeah, we think that love is giving up everything about us, right? Like, I can't want anything, I can't need anything, and that is how people will love me if I am
Mhm.
just this pile of clay to be molded. And it's like, well, you can be in a shape of something and people will love you if those are your people. And sometimes we have an issue with waiting for the right friend to come along, waiting for the right partner, job, or these things to happen. There is this sense of urgency of, now I have one friend but I need 8, so I'll hang out with these other 7 people I don't really like and pretend to, be needless, and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
exhausting to pretend to not have any needs, to like food that you don't really like, to, listen to loud music when you prefer quiet. It is exhausting.
Yeah. And I thought with this quote, "You don't have to be boundaryless to be loved," the parent child relationship came to mind for me because I think sometimes we really feel like we have to make our kids happy all the time. And we have to, give in. Like, I can't have a boundary that I don't want a kid sleeping in my bed. Like, they're going to be sad. They're going to be unhappy. They're going to cry. So setting those boundaries with kids, I think, can be really hard because we want them to be happy. We want them to love us. It's hard to see them upset.
Oh, it's so hard to see him upset. You brought up sleep, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I had the worst nights of sleep in history of parenting last night. Both of
Oh,
my kids were up in my bed. And this morning, I said to my daughter, we're going to have to figure out a solution to this. I'm scared anxiety. We
hmm,
will probably leave on a nightlight and all these things. And she's like, but I'm afraid at night. I said, and so was I, and so was every other child who ever
yeah,
walked this earth. Nighttime is scary. You see shapes, it's all sorts of stuff. But we have to have a well rested mother.
mm-hmm, yep, that's
And
the truth.
without that, you will get a dragon. We will have to come up with some solutions, but the solution is not going to be coming to get in my bed in the middle of the night and waking me up for several hours at a time. So
Yeah.
we'll figure something out. It may take us a while, but we're going to get this thing together because I believe you. This
Mm.
it you know, it's a scary time. And also I I can't suffer as a result of it. So how do
Right.
we figure out some solution to this? And it is sad, it is uncomfortable, and it's hard to say because you do want to be there for them and rescue them from stuff. But a part of parenting is knowing that kids will have their own obstacles and they are not things for you to solve or resolve.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I think when anxiety is involved, the boundaries can get very blurry between the parent and child. And
Mhm.
that setting that boundary, like you can't sleep in my bed every night because I don't sleep. And then I get grumpy, right? That's really
Mhm.
honoring your child's best interest because your child's best interest is not having a grumpy mom every day.
Mhm.
But it's hard for them to see that chain of events when they're young or even when they're older.
Yeah, well, I try to remind them often.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what? I'm a little short because I didn't have enough sleep.
Right, right.
No, I'm
Yeah.
joking, but I will certainly, have some serious conversations with them when they get older so that they understand some of these
Mhm.
things because that understanding helps me in my relationship with my mother when she can explain some of these things I've created stories around and she can give the behind the scenes, and I'm like, now that makes sense. At the time, I was
Yeah.
just thinking, whatever. So it will be important someday for me to let them know that, you know, life was hard raising kids.
Yeah. I think about, my son is kind of a mama's boy. I shouldn't say kind of a mama's boy, a total mama's boy, and he always wants me to be the one reading to him every night, not my husband, so it's always preferring me to read, and I have this ongoing conversation with him where, like, "You know what? Sometimes I need a break, and a break looks like your dad reading to you, and if I don't get a break, what happens?" Right? I
Yeah.
get grumpy, like I get burnout. So I need a break so that I can stay healthy and happy. And I'll try to explain that to him. He's 8. I don't think it's clicking yet, but I think that conversation, that me needing a break and me being showing up as my best self for you as a result of those breaks, I think that's an important conversation even if it's not quite clicking yet.
Mhm. Yeah, I think having those conversation as they're replaying these things, hopefully they remember the part of your explanation too. When they say, "Mom didn't want to
Mhm.
read to me every night, but also mom said." Like,
Yeah.
so a part of the explaining for me is letting them know that, this is why I responded in this way. You may not understand it now, but I hope it becomes a part of your story as to, how something turned out. My daughter is starting to, I would travel for work and she would be like, "I never want you to leave. I miss you. You should never go anywhere." Now her tune has changed. "Mom, I think you should live your dreams." I said,
Oh, I love that. That's
this has
incredible.
come from, explaining, "Hey, mom needs to have time with her friends just like you have time with your friends. You get time with your
Yeah.
friends all day in school. I don't." So this,
Right.
3-hour session of, me going to have dinner with a friend, you have had 10 times that amount.
Yeah.
Rest and relaxation, oh my gosh, your rest level is on 1,000. Mine is on a 5.
Yeah.
So explaining that stuff, I think eventually they understand it like, "Oh, it takes some maturity, right?"
Yeah.
But you can still say it and hopefully they'll start to understand that, I am your mother and I am a human.
Yeah.
I am a
Yeah.
human being and, I want a lot of the same things that you do.
Yeah. And that simple explanation is really valuable. It's not, I'm just leaving because I want to get away from you. Because sometimes if we don't give kids a simple explanation, they will create their own narrative. This, like, my mom
Mhm,
leaves to go out with her friends because she can't stand me or she doesn't want to be with me. And that, you are recharging, you're explaining in a very
mhm,
simple way why you're doing this and how this helps you. And kind of in turn helps your whole family when you get to show up
Mm,
as the person that you want to be.
mhm,
Yeah,
for sure.
I love that. Well, Nedra, I loved your first book. What do you have in the works? Can you share?
Um, I have a lot in the works. Um, I feel like there will be an announcement soon of
Yeah.
something
Ooh, how
very fun and
exciting.
exciting.
Okay.
Um, I will continue to write books for sure. I think there are so many things that need to be spoken about from the point of
Yeah.
view of a therapist. So, yeah, more soon.
I love it. I love it. So we can follow you on Instagram. What's your handle there?
Yes. Nedra Tawwab on Instagram, Nedra Tawwab everywhere. I mean, if you just
Okay.
put that name in, you can find me on anything, right? Like if you just put in Nedra, I pop up. We're not popular as
You're the
Nedra
only one, right?
Tawwabs. Yeah. So,
Right.
I'm not John Smith.
Right. Right.
So,
That helps. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've loved this chat, and I hope to chat with you again soon.
great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Surely this conversation with Nedra had you thinking all about boundaries and probably how they impact your life and your relationship in ways that you never imagined. If you want to get in touch with Nedra or the things that we talked about today, go to simplefamilies.com/episode 323. As always, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here.